I can do things at WED without asking anybody, even my wife.
Coney Island, world's biggest barrel of
and
fun.
anywhere else your imagination takes you.
Okay, we've done that now.
To get the whole show now, you hurry.
Anything's possible in Disneyland.
Welcome aboard the Themed Attraction Podcast, where we take you for a ride through the wonderful world of theme park design. That is, you've just set sail toward an adventure of discovery and discussion with theme park industry masters of the craft. I'm your skipper, Freddie Martin, and floating the river with me, as always, is theme park designer, master planner, and chief creative officer for Storyland Studios, Mel McGowan. Where's the river taking us today, Mel?
Well, Freddie, I hope you're ready for uncharted waters. Themed entertainment podcast first. We're opening a door for our very first ever interview of a Walt Disney Imagineering president. Today, we're joined by Barbara Bouza, my friend, former president of WDI. She led the global team responsible for designing Disney's parks, resorts, cruise ships, and immersive experiences around the world, including some of my favorites from Avengers Campus, the Disney Wish, Tron Light Cycle Run, and of course, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser.
Oh, yes. And if visionary leadership you seek, kind of sounded like Yoda just then. If visionary leadership you seek, Barbara brought with her decades of architectural and design expertise with Gensler, working with NASA and Netflix, and then guiding Imagineering through one of its most transformative chapters. She's a trailblazer, a champion of well-being and design, and the first woman and person of color to serve as president of Imagineering. This is a conversation packed with insight, innovation, and inspiration. You won't want to miss it. Alrighty, folks, keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the boat, because this episode is about to leave the dock. Hit it, Sam. All right, Mel, close your eyes and imagine that you wake up tomorrow and you're in charge of all of Walt Disney Imagineering. It's like your 15-year-old dream. Now you're in charge. You get to go ahead and do everything about it. I mean, what is that picture in your head? I know me, it was like a lot of what happened with the original ideas for Adventureland and having the Indiana Jones ride interconnect with the Jungle Cruise, rope bridges across everything. Like my vision, I even had a vision actually one time. I drew pictures. Well, I think I was 18. I drew pictures of a Rescuers ride. This is before Rescuers Down Under, and it wasn't, their favorite IP. But I figured, man, to get into Evinrude's Leaf and buzz through the bayou, that would be a fun one. So those are the types of directions that I always dreamed of. Like, if I was in charge of Imagineering, what would I do? It's kind of a fun exercise to say, look, what would I do? Where would I be?
Yeah, ultimate blue sky Imagineering, couch potato Imagineering.
That's right.
I think I've been rehearsing this question since I was 14, probably, and first heard of Marty Sklar's job and was gunning for it. But I think today I'd probably say I'd want not just that job, but I would also probably want Josh D'Amaro's job. I think that Marty talks about in his book that tension historically between the operations and the Imagineering or the design. So it's almost like a consultant-client relationship / tension. Whereas I think the best case scenario was back in the day when it was really Walt's private company and his happy place. And it was very much integrated in terms of the value creation happened, much like a studio where, WI is creating the value, and there's a different power dynamic there where they're not just serving clients that are essentially the operators. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah, but it's like back then, I think the picture that we got from all the Disneyland books and how things were created was a far more loose. Do what you want and just put it out there. Whereas now it's a major corporation. I mean, it's on its own.
We're all proud of Mark Woodbury, the guy,
that's right.
An inmate is finally running the asylum, that you actually have an architect, a designer, someone that understands spatial storytelling actually running the show over there. But anyways, all kidding aside, with if I did have those keys to the kingdom, if you will, one of the ones that I still am gunning for is that idea of redeveloping Epcot's parking lot in the same way that we redeveloped Disneyland's parking lot.
Yes.
And bringing something a little closer to Walt's original vision to life of an environment where he could live, work, play, taste the future. And I just think that that's just a field of dreams and opportunities waiting to happen someday.
Yes, that's right. Like if the World Showcase was just outside your window of your apartment
Well,
or your
that was the
condo,
Westcott
right?
idea.
Yeah.
That was Tony Baxter's Westcott idea of the Asian hotel, the African hotel, the European hotel, looking right under the Eiffel Tower within Westcott. But I want to live in the future, man. I want to.
Yeah, there you go.
Hang out with Mr. Morrow,
Mr. Tom Morrow. Well, let's be real. The dream of being in charge of Walt Disney Imagineering, I mean, that sounds like an ultimate gig. But when you look past the fantasy, being the president is an enormous operation, staggering number of moving parts. There's way too many pieces to this. And so from your perspective, what is that grim yet rewarding mentality of leading something that complex? What does it actually take to keep that creative machine running?
Well, I think I can identify a little bit, the left, right brain, there's lots of different personalities. You're constantly in this dynamic creative tension or healthy tension, I should say, between the incoming demand, the workload, and having the right size and the right mix of the team, and trying to even flow that. WDI is a little unique in that they don't also have to drum up their own work. They kind of have those requests come into them, so they're not necessarily responsible for creating
creating the
leads
business
and managing from contact to contract. That phase of it. But with all that said, again, just that enormous complexity and different personality types, and the expertise required to kind of be that conductor, of the symphony, to make sure each seat is filled with the best possible, artists and craftsmen and technician possible.
That certainly the let them cook mentality. But with a framework, right? Naturally,
exactly.
Well, I think that's really what blows me away about our guest today, Barbara Bouza. Her leadership at Walt Disney Imagineering brought together world-class design, technical expertise, and people-first approach. Like that really comes through in this interview you're about to hear, to leading some really ambitious projects around the globe. Her story is one of bold creativity and visionary problem solving at the highest level. So you're definitely you're definitely going to want to lean in on this one, folks. We really hope you enjoy this interview. But real quick, full disclosure: by the time we wrapped up our conversation with Barbara, we were having so much fun, but we wrapped it up, and then we realized something. We never even touched on some of the biggest headlines from Barbara's time at Imagineering, like the launch of Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser or that whole Lake Nora relocation saga. We left it on the table.
Yeah, apparently when you're talking to someone that's run the biggest architecture company in the world and the biggest experience design operation in the world, that many years of brain damage and insight time happens to really fly when you're having that much fun.
Yeah, so we barely scratched the surface. So consider this part one. And let's just say, Barbara, if you're listening, we're saving Star Cruiser, Zootopia, and all the spicy stuff for next time. How's that? All right, folks, sit back, relax, and enjoy the Themed Attraction Podcast interview with Barbara Bouza.
Barbara, hey, thanks so much for getting back together. I feel so blessed to be able to break bread with you. Like, I think it was a week or so ago, and to get back together here on the podcast. Great to be with you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and speak with you guys.
We are honored to have our first past president of Walt Disney Imagineering. We normally like to focus on the different disciplines that make up this wonderful multidisciplinary collective art form of ours that you call Imagineering. We at Storyland we call it spatial storytelling, but
Sure.
We've rarely ever had a chance to have the actual conductor of the orchestra in the room. So we're just excited at the conversation ahead. See where it goes.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, I'm honored too. We met a few years ago. You'll forget it, but I remembered it, and it's just super cool to share a little bit of the story and where you've been and what amazing projects you've been involved in. Got to share about in the past, but I would love to kind of figure out a little bit about who is Barbara Bouza from the beginning? And I know you're an architect by trade.
Yeah.
What got you into drawing pictures of places that people can walk into?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm licensed architect and studied architecture. So I could go way, way back because even in high school, it was kind of interesting. And people like when I mention this.
What about the womb? You're skipping a whole phase. Skipping some geography here.
I'll work my way forward and backwards. It's one of those kind of stories. But I remember in high school, I always loved art, but at the same time, I loved math, that side of it. So when you kind of think of that creative, but the technical. So I never saw myself, let's say, as a fine artist, but, how do you build? I remember being young and we'd run around by construction sites. I don't think you can do this anymore. And grab pieces
legally.
of wood. I don't even think they were fenced up and build stuff. And I remember in high school having to take you select an elective. And I can't just say because the architecture landed in the A's that I picked it. But I think that might have been what happened. Or I thought, wow, that sounds fascinating. But before you could take architecture, you had to take mechanical drawing. And I was just amazed that, wow, there are actually tools out there where you can draw a straight line or, an isometric. And so it really opened my eyes to these tools. And then I took an architectural drawing class. I really didn't know what architecture was per se, but I knew I loved this idea around the built environment. And then went on to Cal Poly Pomona to get my Bachelor of Architecture. And that's where I met my husband, who's also an architect. And husband Manuel, and then
our shared alma mater. Go Broncos!
Yeah, and Bob Weiss. It's just so funny how there's this it's done a lot. And then about a couple of years after we'd graduated, both had worked. I had opportunity to move to London, and we thought, before we settle down, kids, buy a house, all that good stuff, and went and studied at the AA, which is the Architectural Association, and that was exciting. And when I look back on it, I was studying with Ron Heron. So I'm, from the 60s and the 70s, think of British, think of Archigram, Walking Cities.
Yeah.
That was his fame. And then Janko Plicky, who led Future Systems. And I think it was some of that early thinking. A lot of our projects were, how do you start to look at resorts on the, English seaside? So something very different than the California beaches that I grew up with.
Sure.
And so I think those were some of those early tests, because he was really also early about inspired by technology. And I remember, I think when we lived in London, it's when I got my first, Macintosh. I can't remember what it was called back then, right? It's evolved, but we were, it was pretty crude what we were doing, but it was always kind of this art and sciences, art and technology was influential. And then I went on to work at, with Norman Foster and Partners. We were going to go a year. We stayed 3.5 years and just worked with a number of really tremendous firms. Probably had my longest stint at Gensler, 18 years.
We're collaborating with both Lord Norman Foster's group and Gensler as we speak. So that's some good company.
Small
that's awesome.
World. And, there are a few others on the way. I had a chance to work with IMPay directly. That was fantastic. And I was with Morphosis. So, I always tell younger designers, get that multiple experience, but at some point you do want to see projects through. So, bounce around a little bit, not too much, but I think it's great to get that early experience. And, at Disney, recruiter called me up in 2019, and to be honest with you, I thought, you think of Norman Foster's work, and a lot of my work was much more.
So why so serious?
And it's like Disney. But the more we were talking, and I knew Bob as well. You think of the theme parks; they are like cities. You have
Yes,
every
sure.
really discipline, and that's what's really special about them. From retail to they're really like urban planning, infrastructure, and I also very passionate about a lot of work globally, and that was another piece. And what was interesting also this idea around being very people focused. That's something that I'm just very passionate about, and I think that was something that was important. But fast forward, ultimately started in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic.
Nice timing.
Right. Lucky person.
So
I
were
think
the parks?
anything that Disney owned was not operating. I think Disney Plus was the only thing that was operating at the time. And then, the parks, Shanghai, Hong Kong started opening up, world opened up, et cetera. But I just thought, if in the world, we didn't know the pandemic, right? It's going to be a few months, going to be a year. And I said, well, if Disney can't turn around, then the world's got bigger problems.
Yes.
But little did I know.
Wow. Now, talk about, this trinity of Bobs, Bob Weiss, Bob Chapek, Bob Iger. I don't know how you got your bosses straight, but had you had a relationship with any one of the Bobs
all of them
beforehand?
Worked with all of them, and to be honest with you, they're all extraordinarily talented in their own way and very different. So I do feel very honored that I was able to work with all. And I think it's, I always tell people, I feel like I got a PhD in leadership because,
wow.
You see what works, what doesn't work, and dealing with, think of the pandemic, right? And how do you then be part of how that turns around, right? Things open up, things shut. And, how do you make sure you're not making a decision in the moment? You got to look towards the future. But the industry is disruptive, right? Everything, work environment's disrupted. Guest norms and what, guest expectations have evolved, and how do you position? But I loved being in meetings where, I felt, my voice was heard. We could talk about things. People say, oh my God, we've been talking about that for 10 years. And, we can talk ourselves out of anything. And so it was fascinating to be with around that change. And, challenges, a lot of challenges.
I mean, I'm imagining that you're kind of brought in intentionally from the outside as I don't know if disruptor is the right word, but did Bob Weiss kind of ask you, what do you think was, what were they,
Catalyst?
What were they thinking? No, I'm just kidding. What were they looking for? What is it that you were supposed to bring, or that you brought?
I think we all, recognize, right, this industry, if you look at, themed attraction, themed entertainment has really matured. And so, if you go back to the original Disneyland, how much you have to do yourselves with, especially as Imagineering versus now, there are just so many talented groups, Storyline Studios, you can name many that have brought in specialty. And I think, even through my work at Gensler, really, when you're out there with, I've worked a lot with Netflix as an example from kind of those early days and seeing how they're evolving from more a tech company to a content creator, or working with NASA and how they start to tackle. And you just have this exposure, and Disney is a bit of a bubble, but it's a great bubble. It's so big and there's so much there. But sometimes it's good to see, well, wait a minute, how do we look at other ways of methodology, construction, or the design? Because the reality is it's just getting more expensive to create what we do create. And so I think, the Bob Weiss, I love the way he used to say, we need to help looking outside of the castle walls every once in a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mentioned leadership, and Disney is famous for building up great leaders within that fold. And so, to Mel's question, they see that leader in you and bring you on board. How did you find that? And I'm sure at Gensler, you're a great leader. It's not like this is your first day in leadership. You're leading, one of the most creative teams on the planet.
Right.
How did you feel that might have been different, say, than other places that you've been part of? That I see it as very much a culture of driving leadership, driving good leadership. And how did you see that as being different or surprising as far as what they expected of you?
Yeah, and it's a great question because there were many aspects of leadership that, through my experience at Ginza and other places, that it translates, right? You're taking a project from a very creative blue sky ideation. Ultimately, for the guest to experience it, you got to be able to build it, right? You got to be able to deliver on it.
Right.
And so very similar, what I loved with Imagineering is, okay, now I'm working with musicians and, PhDs and story writers. So it's not, the traditional architecture, interior design realm. And I love that all those disciplines across the world were within Imagineering. But, back to coming in during an extraordinary time, I felt, every company was, right, people furloughed, right? And projects stopped. And is this, when's this park going to open? And so I felt like I really did want to lean in and need to lean into how do you put people first? Because at the end of the day, it's about the talent. It's about the people. And one thing I was just amazed, I shouldn't have been amazed, but the depth of talent, specifically at Imagineering, is just so deep. It's not like some companies, okay, it's on the surface or here's a few stars. It goes very, very deep. And also the love people had of Disney, the culture. Even if somebody is furloughed, they would still talk about their love, and they really wanted, because people knew this was an extraordinary time, right? It was happening around the world. It wasn't like somebody at the company did something to somebody. It was just some tough decisions, but we were all in it together. Yeah. So I felt, I think where I could partner with Bob really great was he definitely had the depth, the history, creative genius. People loved what he brought, but he was so close to it, right?
Right.
Whereas I really tried to say, okay, let me come in with fresh eyes. In some ways, how are we looking at the future? How are we looking at, here's a discipline, maybe, are we going to have a lot of projects that do that now? Or is the technology going to shift? And so we just kind of created that partnership. But to be honest with you, I told myself, if I see things that are kind of crazy here, I'm not going to hold anyone to it because we're in crazy times. Yeah, now maybe in hindsight, maybe they were crazy, but I think it was new for a lot of people. But I think at the end of the day, it was really about leaning into, I think as leaders, we're there to support the teams to really help them do their best work. And so I use that as a filter. Is this decision that we're making going to create extraordinary experiences for the guest? Is it going to make the work experience for our teams as great as they can be given the circumstances? Because you see people put everything into it. So ultimately, how do you support that? And, fast forward, we all kind of came out the other side very well, with the everything opening, the industries, I think, thriving, and but it's different.
Yeah, success story. I'd love to stay on that topic of leadership for a bit. And, again, Bob Weiss, Bob Iger, Bob Shape, three very different personalities, different types of leaders. And, a lot of listeners may not understand, Gensler is a pretty respected, I think it's the largest architecture firm in the world, and pretty good track record, pretty respected in terms of continuous leadership that's been passed on from the founder, Art Gensler, onto the different principles. And, again, a well-run, respected culture of leadership there. Love to just get your fresh perspective, with all the fan community and the, online stuff. There's people love to nitpick and second guess and Monday morning quarterback. Right. I'd love to just hear from your unique perspective. Like, what were some of the positive leadership traits or style, or, distinguishers from each of those Bobs that you would, top line summary?
Yeah, I think for me, even kind of making the connection back to Ginza, I was at Ginza for a number of years and a lot of people around the world thought, oh, you're interiors firm, right? Or, people do put you in bucket and I remember when we really put a big push into really growing the architecture. And then the other piece was, how do you really diversify your markets? Because we all know that, kind of think of them as pistons, right? Entertainment could be up, but then maybe it's the education market or it's the sciences or community. It's all funded a little bit different. So the other piece that we really looked at, and this is something I felt that was important when I came to Disney, was you could be a US-based company with a lot of international locations, or you can operate truly globally. And I felt like that's the difference. And so when I came to Disney, I felt like we were still very, and this is just my perception. People might say different. Does all creative really have to live in Southern California? Not saying we want to move everybody, but I'm just saying. But the reality is, when you looked at Paris was 30 years old, Hong Kong's 20 years old, Tokyo 40 years old. So there is an extensive amount of depth and Disney experience around the world. And I said, man, you could not buy that. That's gold. And how do you begin to leverage that? And I think we all learned through the pandemic, you didn't really have a choice. And so we just really started to see some extraordinary talent. And that would be something that I felt really strong about, that, people were telling story, in Asia a lot longer than they were here in the US, right? So I think it's to lean into that. And, I think even Bob Iger says at one of the town halls, you look at some of the, like Squid Games, right? That's announced Netflix, but if that would go through a filter here, would it exist and would it still come out the same, right? So I think it's that balance. You want to keep the continuity of the creativity and the core values and the history. You don't want to lose that. You want what Disney does is uniquely Disney. What Netflix does is uniquely Netflix. It's not, you don't have to even compete at it. But I think that with Disney, the fact that the sort of strength and depth globally is super powerful. And so I would love to see that go further. And so a couple of the, I had the benefit of having one-on-ones with, the Bobs, all the Bobs. And one thing that would come up a lot, which was very interesting, you name your Bob, was you're going to want to try to move things forward, move ideas forward. Think of you like riding a bicycle.
Yes.
And you're going to get people that are going to say, not so fast. This is not how we do it. And it's not out of, it's just, there's been periods where we know, oh my God, the guests have loved the work, the quality of the storytelling. And every time you go through these different periods, but at the same time, I think Walt would even say it, right? You've got to always look to the future. Those stories evolve. And so going to the future doesn't mean you're disregarding the past. It's actually you're building upon it and really loving it. And so I think, but that was sort of their feedback to me, is you're going to get people that are going to, or, fans, and they're doing it out of love, right? That are going to push it back to the point where be careful, you'll probably get knocked off the bicycle.
Yeah.
And pedal backwards. So that was very different than what I had experienced. Maybe
they tried to have you brace for impact.
Yes.
Don't drive so fast.
I've seen that. I've seen that in a lot of different jobs where there's always a contingent that is well rooted in the past and well meaning, that they say, "Oh, we don't do it that way," and they're smart people, and so there's a challenge to, okay, well, how do I navigate this? And but hey, you're the boss, so that becomes a new opportunity to help others grow, right?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is, I think with even as a leader, it's never, it has to be not about the leader. It has to be about the teams and the work. And I think Walt even said it's people that make the magic, right? Makes and so I definitely felt that was important. But it was great. I loved the passion. And also, it's interesting being so close to the guests, meaning you could build something, build something, be there, see the reaction, read about the reaction. Mm-hmm. And, I have a lot of respect and for that, because you don't get that everywhere. And I think it's, I generally believe many times it's out of a place of caring and people really care about it. Difference of opinions.
Yeah.
But,
sure.
I think there's a passion and understanding. I grew up going Disney, when I was a kid, we'd come down, and I was telling somebody there, and you can cut me off if I'm talking too much, but I love the subject.
That's what you're here for.
There was this picture I found. It's so interesting. I would have never remembered it. We all take the picture in front of the castle, but there's this picture that's, me, my mom, my younger sister, and my cousin. They're all looking at the camera. I'm literally turned back looking at the castle. Looks like we had just walked through the castle. And I kind of think I wonder if that was me saying, wow, this bringing the story to life, as we said, or, the detail of the materials, the stonework, the colors, because I definitely had it. You could clearly see the picture. I had a different reaction than everyone else. And when I look at that, it kind of reminds me, I think that was one of my first sort of cues. I was probably like 7 or 8 years old at the time.
I know that famous Imagineering quote that nobody comes out humming the architecture except for Barbara Bouza.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. I'm curious too. I don't mean to back up in the career clock here, but
sure.
At Gensler, you worked on things like City of Hope, hospitals, and NASA, where you're helping to send real rockets up into space, and then you go over to the imaginary rockets and spaceships and all of that. What's that sort of transition from reality to entertainment value? And you spoke to it a bit with the regard to the fans, but there's a different responsibility, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe the common thread is the human experience. So I think for Gensler, along with a couple other partners, we'd actually started the health and wellness practice. And so before joining Gensler, it didn't matter. Even when I was at IMPay, I worked on a healthcare project. It was interesting, but it's interesting to see how he did it. So I wasn't so much focused on healthcare. So when I came to Gensler, a lot of clients or people would reach out and say, hey, can you look at them? Gensler doesn't do healthcare, right, at that time. But I said, there's a lot of great firms out there. That's what they do. But, how do you play to the strengths? And so at that time, Gensler was very strong in like the workplace and really understanding. And workplace isn't about interior design. It's about really aligning how does the physical environment align with what the company's culture, vision, that built environment. Because you really idea of workplace is how do you create your best work? So. Sure. A stadium can be a work environment. So I said, hospital, that's a workplace environment. And I found that clients would say, God, nobody's ever had that kind of conversation with us. Now that doesn't sound like rocket science now, but back then it was very much, people looked at the technical aspects. So it's about changing that conversation. And so what I always believed in is like, how do you play to the strengths? How do you play to, and what comes together is it's a very human-centric environment. So we even intentionally, and I'm not sure if that's still the same, it was a health and wellness practice. So the idea was to be much more at the front end, more about what's that experience, that experiential design. How do you look at the behavior? How do you start to solve it in a different way? And so that was the key. So it's interesting you bring that up, because when the Disney recruiter, when she asked, why me? And she mentioned, actually, she goes, I see you have a background in health and wellness. So it wasn't about healthcare,
right?
But it was about, so if you think of the well-being of our guests, right? You're in the park all day and it's hot, or it's about safety. Safety's super important. Security, that's about cleanliness, believe it or not. I mean, I remember we went on a Disney cruise when we were young. I was like, that was the first time I'd ever seen these sanitation stations. Yes. I thought, wow, that's so brilliant when you got kids. But again, so it's not that different. And I think that's where it started to translate together.
I'd love to get your, at least the first impression of that cultural difference between, not necessarily specific about Gensler, but architects and architecture versus, walking into this vast orchestra now where, one section is the architects, but you've also got 140 disciplines that surround that. Like, how would you compare, contrast that cultural difference? I know for us, when we've hired Gensler architects or people that come from an architecture perspective, and I almost feel like we have to change the vocabulary a little bit, change almost de-architect a little. I mean, you have to, there's a reason that. I know.
Well, it works both ways, because it was interesting, because I think sometimes there's people think, okay, an architect is kind of this monolith, because all people say, do you draw the drawings, or do you build and architecture is so broad. People could have roles where they are just doing very conceptual work, and working on a football stadium is very different than maybe designing a boutique restaurant. And so there's similarities in the process, but the scale. And one thing, but I think architecture as a training, what's great is you can take very large, very complex projects or problems, and you tend to be able to visualize, and you tend to be able to break it down. You could scale it. It's process, because people were like blown away, like, how could you all of a sudden come into Disney and it's like people in these parks all over the world? And but I could, like, because I could visualize, and because we were remote initially, I almost kind of book learned a little bit of. So by the time I first stepped into Shanghai or Paris, oh, I got it. I got the scale. I understood it. But what I was surprised is, when I look at people that work within like themed attractions, entertainment, for some reason, sometimes architects are given a very narrow, but they're the architects. They only like drop the show box versus, but I understand that, because many times when architects describe projects, we get very much into the materials, and it can be very abstract. And so what I've brought back now to a lot of design firms is talking about, you got to get to the story. You've got to tell the story. Like, why is this important? Get to the heart of it. Because this building, it has a history, right? It used to be a manufacturing plant, and this is why, et cetera, versus talking about, why we use steel and, insulated glass because we want it to meet a sustainability requirement. It's like, get to the heart. And so I think that's what I love about bridging this all together, because I think we can learn both ways. But that was, I don't know if that helped you, but that kind of, I'd love to have people to have a better understanding that architects are much broader than I think the perception is.
Right.
I had a lot of architects, even at Disney, that said, wow, people think I only can do this. But I have a background in this other area.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so, and then vice versa, I think we could be better storytellers as well as architects.
How about, this is maybe interesting to me. As a project director, I sometimes get assigned to a project that's already rolling, or I'm there at the inception and the idea and the blue sky process. And so there's always a learning curve when I come in late. And so I'm very curious about what was going on that eventually got built when you walked in the door, and that you had to go, okay, this is moving, and then saw it through during your time there.
When I look back, and that everything that we were able to, some things had started, stopped, and then we finished it, and other things we created, you'd be shocked. I actually wrote it down because I thought, God, if we can create all that within this, during the pandemic and then beyond, it's just amazing what you can create. But I think, to me, the biggest learning curve was, and maybe what helped, it's not that it was a good thing, we had a lot of projects that were like kind of paused, right? So I literally could get my head around, okay, here are the handful. And then it wasn't that long before things picked up again. So, if you just say between, the scale of Fantasy Springs in Tokyo, all of that, right? And the new Space Mountain in Shanghai, the Zootopia, and plus the third hotel in Paris, the Avengers Campus, but we were also doing the Avengers Campus and the Stuntronics at Disneyland.
Yeah, right.
And then also some of the early work in terms of the Art of Marvel Hotel. We did the Art of Marvel Hotel and the Disneyland renovation, which is absolutely stunning. And then even you look at the nighttime spectacular. I think one of my favorites is Momentous at Hong Kong, and also the rebuilding of the castle. So that had started, and there's this fantastic time lapse that shows the days, and you kind of look, it's like 2019, 2020. Oh, there's the pandemic.
Yeah, right.
and then it finally opens. I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe it was like July or later in the year. And then, World, Guardians of the Galaxy, Cosmic Rewind, and, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure,
yes.
Tiana's Bayou, which had just opened up, and then Disneyland. a lot of early sort of blue sky work, which is like the work Avatar that's starting to be, you get a little bit more the Disneyland Forward, just getting that set up for the release with Anaheim, and then the cruise line. So Wish from early on, get that delivered, and then still the design on the Treasure and then the Adventure, which are both coming out this year to guests, and then all the live entertainment group Muppets and everything. So there was no shortage. I think I touched a small percentage. So learning curve, but I said when the depth of talent is so strong, it was more of like, okay, what do you need? What do you need to see this through? And it was tough because there were times where you travel, but wait, because of the pandemic, people were separated from families, or how do we support that? Or how do we leverage, and then, if this park closed, what's going on in construction? So learning curve, but it wasn't, to me, there were just so many other bigger issues going on.
Yes, right.
It was
Exactly.
like, if we can get this over the finish line, and the work and the quality was just extraordinary, that people should be proud. And I thought, wow, if you can do this during that time, you should be able to do so much more without that. But there's other forces that come
we
in.
can actually gather around a water cooler. What could we do?
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you, just again, as a chief creative officer and kind of ultimately, representing a firm and reputation of the work. When I was at Disney, Michael Eisner would still stay in a model room and test out the towels. And he had to really sign everything out personally from the CEO's office. And I presume that, those levels of decision-making and creative sign-off have been delegated. What was your approach to kind of just creative quality control?
Yeah, I think it depended on obviously the project, but when you start to have so much work going around the world, you don't want to hold it up. You don't want to hold up the when you have so much work going on around the world, you don't want to hold it up, right? You want to be able to move things forward, but at the same time, I think it was also important to have those reviews, and people would make themselves available, because there's at some point it's never too late to change, right? It's never too late to turn back, but the consequences is that can affect the budget, the schedule, and that has a ripple effect. And so I think, you can always look at a project and say, wow, we should have reviewed this earlier. You think it's good because you're so close to it. The teams are so close to it. But others, and I think it's if you have that right complement of team there, and because we have the benefit of so much experience, right? You got a Tom Fitz who's, can do this in his sleep. And boy, I know if he's at the helm, I'm like, good. Or Scott Trowbridge, it's just, different, but so talented. Carmen Smith, as she looked at, just has done this. And so I just, and I have to believe, others, whether Universal or, any of the others, even your team, you have to balance that. But it's good
to know when the train has left the station.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and also you're speaking to the amount of trust that you have to have in people like Scott, or that this person is capable, and so it's easy to hand off responsibility and effort to folks that you just know. These people are solid, and it sounds like you were surrounded by solid folks.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, how do you also give some of the younger designers that balance, those opportunities, right? And I think we really tested it, especially during pandemic when people couldn't travel. So you could be on these Zoom calls, but there's such a difference of reviewing, some of the mock-ups in person, and you could be going around them with a little, with your iPad and computer. It's just very different. And so there were some areas where, could we've done something differently, but I think given the time, the team should be really proud of what they've done.
Yeah, especially this is a chapter in Walt Disney Imagineering's history that is going to be studied and looked at. When the 70-year book or the 80-year books are written, there's going to be a period that says, "Hey, this was upending of everything that we knew to be true. And this is the impact of the people who were there working on it at that time. I think that's going to be, I mean, we're living in it now, but it's interesting to hear you share that perspective, because I think it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I hope people, because I always felt it was important. It's easy to kind of get back to, okay, everything's good now. But what people went through and what they did and sacrificed, you just never want that lost. And I think there was a lot learned in new ways of working that I think, companies should take up. Because I do see the future as being what I'd call somewhat of a hybrid in choice, right? Meaning there's so many different ways you can create an experience or experience it yourself. It's not just a one size fits all, and you have to see what works for the project. But I do think, not that I should be bringing this up, but you also political crosshairs, right? It was like, how do you navigate that, right? And that's probably not going to go away in this world. And it's not even, what your political leaning is. It's how do you, support your teams, but at the same time, balance. And then when you're global as well, you've got different, cultural norms that, hey, that might not be, sometimes I felt like California and Florida were two different countries, but, both extraordinary people and great towns, a lot of similarities, but I think Disney has the opportunity when you step in the park, you leave it at the gate, and you are really shoulder to shoulder with people that probably have different political views, different backgrounds, but they're there for their families. They're there for the love of the experience. And I think the more we can, I think that's what people do love to come and have that shared experience.
Did you know that the human brain is wired for story? It's why Storyland Studios places story at the heart of everything we do. Storyland Studios is a full-service experience design and strategy firm that imagines, designs, and creates story-driven experiences that lift the spirit. Inspired by the design principles of the original Walt Disney Imagineers, our award-winning team collaborates closely to provide strategic design solutions that will help bring your ideas to life. Through strategic experience design, immersive storytelling, and exceptional service, we imagine with you, design beside you, and create world-class experiences and destinations that are enjoyed by millions of guests and visitors on every habitable continent around the globe. Connect with the team at Storyland Studios to get started building your impossible dream today. Visit StorylandStudios.com or call now, 800-218-1932. That's 800-218-1932. Storyland Studios. Imagine, design, create.
That's definitely one of the things I love most about the industry, but specifically, the fact that you could be in communist China, whether you're at the Capitol in Beijing, at Universal, or Shanghai, or you could be in Central Florida, complete opposite end, I think, politically. But when you're there, you realize we have way more in common as a human species than we ever have differently. When you see that dad with his daughter with the princess dress
oh my God, you could be anywhere
on
in
his
the world
shoulders, it does not
exactly.
matter. It's so powerful. I love it. I assume you're a fellow Disney bingo card carrying. You've hit all the parks like me. Do you have
good point. Yes, I've been to
Yeah. Do you have a compare and contrast? Are you allowed to talk favorite kids or any? Because I would argue they feel pretty different. That's one thing I personally love about them, is how actually the nuances and differences. There are certain, obviously common, traits.
Yeah.
But I love how different Shanghai feels from Disneyland, for example. Just
and I think that's what's special. To be honest with you, when years ago we'd go to Tokyo, it wouldn't even cross my mind. I'm like, why would I go to Disneyland? I've been to the world. I've been to Disneyland. Like, you don't go all the way to Paris and to Tokyo, right? And until I went, I thought, and that's why I became like this champion to people saying, "Oh no, it's actually different." It's there's the things that you're familiar with, which are special, but I love going to Tokyo, all of them actually, but Tokyo was very interesting because even recently my daughter came with us, and she was just amazed, like, wow, people like dress up, and the not only just in costumes, but even just dress really nice, right? And it's an outing and a group of girlfriends together. It was great. And we were eating at a restaurant, and this one woman, she was eating alone, but she had all her like Duffy bears and stuffed animals like set up on the table, like they were having tea with her. And so it was just, and the park's extraordinary. And last time I was over there was so much fun because this is when the Dodgers were in the World Series, and we're a big Shohei Ohtani fan. And so I brought a couple of jerseys over there, and I have a few colleagues that we both have a love of baseball. And so I think you're right, as you were saying, Mel, it's the similarities, but I would say every park. And the only thing else I would say, when I went to Paris once, for the very first time in my life, I said, I had some extra time. So I said, I'm just going to go hang out in the park by myself. And I think we're always used to being with either, our families or kids, friends, or it's work. And there was just something I loved about just eating whenever I wanted ice cream, or I went on the train, or just, the parade's coming, let me just get a spot. And just sitting on a bench and watching a family. And like you were saying, even though they were speaking French, it was like a mom, and she had like her 10-year-old and her 7-year-old. And of course, it's the 10-year-old that's crying, not the 7-year-old, because 7-year-old's beating up on the, it was just kind of like I could have been anywhere. I could have been in Orlando, I could have been in Anaheim. And it was just that the family really enjoying this time out, and they're tired. And it was all those things that we experienced. So, I think it's everywhere. It's that's what's special. They're unique.
That's wonderful. Any spectacular openings of projects that when you saw it completed, just kind of threw you for a loop at how beautiful it is? Now, of course, I know you're probably visiting at various stages along the way, so it's hard. I always thought it was sad that Walt never got to see Disneyland as we see it, with the protections of back, we don't see backstage, we don't see how everything's made, in our early visits. But anything that just kind of blew you away as the meaning or the specialness?
Well, one thing that was interesting for me, and I'm just, I could probably give you 1,000 examples, is when we were working on Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, as an example. And I remember it didn't even occur to me that a lot of people work on the ride will write it hundreds of times. Yeah. It was almost a little bit of a contest. And I would say that attraction's kind of almost at my limit of like, where I have to catch my breath afterwards. I absolutely love it. Here. And I remember, obviously, through construction, through going through the design, but then going through construction and writing it. But they remind me, we haven't synced the video with this, so you can feel that. And I remember one of the first times I wrote it, I closed my eyes just because I was like, I don't know, I don't know what level it's going to be. I know it intellectually, but physically. And I was telling Tom, I was convinced. I'm going upside down. We're doing this. And he's like, I don't know. And so when you actually ride with your eyes open, it's actually an amazing experience, right? Because it all comes together, right. The eye point, and everything's in sync and working. And so to me, when that one finally all came together, and I did ride with my eyes open, I was like, that's it. And that's one of many examples, but, it just transformed even the way, because I was notorious for like, I'm going to Space Mountain, I'm going to close my eyes. It's just because it's already dark anyway, but it's different. And so, I always tell people, it's like, nope, ride with your eyes open. You actually, it's just a different experience. And so I think that was one and maybe because it had gone through like the pandemic, and then we got down to the details of the music and the song, and when it all just came together, it's extraordinary. But
that's so cool.
There was a lot of great.
Well, it was a joy to get to be with you. I think we were at Disneyland together shortly after Tiana's Bayou Adventure opened. Yeah. And if you remember, I think we were with the show writer, or one of the show writers on the attraction. So, as daughter of an African-American little girl that just was so excited to see her favorite princess get her own e-ticket attraction. That was what a joy to share in that.
Oh yeah, I mean that was one of the first projects I remember. When I came in and Bob said, "Okay, we got to get Sharita back. We got to work with Carmen." And I know Joseph. A lot of people added to the team later, but kind of tying that together. If you just even talk about architecture, so as an African American woman, I don't think people realize just in the United States alone, it's only like 0.4% of the profession. So not even 1%. And, if I knew that stat early on, I might have thought, God, the odds of becoming an architect is pretty rare. But I didn't kind of know until later on. And I feel like, where the stats are important, it's important to be able to say, I could be that role model. How do we get more? And I keep thinking, I see more and more people, African-American women becoming architects, but we overall get more architects. And so, it's still kind of a small number, but again, it's it shouldn't stop anyone in terms of, working on themed attractions, architecture, interior design, being an art director. I mean, there are just so many extraordinary areas, towns. And one of my favorite things was when you could take somebody like a Wright engineer who has, let's say they had a history background, and let them start looking at the story because they bring it from a different perspective. And so I think that cross-discipline is just incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah, and then that feeds through to the guest. I had an incredible privilege. The first time I rode Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I was with friends, and they're an African American family with kids, small kids, all the way up to grandma, all piled into the logs, and the impact of the queue and the story, just everything that they could talk about was absolutely beautiful and spot on to I think what Imagineering was aiming at is, let's tell stories that aren't the stories that we all think we are entitled to have the stories being told. Let's see it through these eyes. And I'm sitting there a passive observer, and just the thrill and the uniqueness of it was, and I hope to see, was something that is meaningful. Like, there's meaning behind what we do, not just, hey, we're throwing out fun every day.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's amazing the impression you make. I had people come up to me at D23, young girls, women, like, oh my God. I think that's people, a lot of Imagineers, a lot of people at Disney Parks, people will say, oh my God, this changed my life, or this saved my life. I was like, wow, oh my God, that is a heavy responsibility we have as a profession. But you are, I think experiences do shape behavior. Experiences do shape that first impression. You may not like me, like going through that castle. I might have not thought much about it, but there was something that definitely resonated. And so as we're telling stories or how we're depicting different people or cultures, it's we're not saying it's education, but that's how you learn. That might be the first time somebody knew of somebody from that part of the world. Yeah. And because it's so engaging, right? I'm not reading a textbook. It's a beautiful story. And so, I definitely take this work very seriously. It's fun, keeping the fun, but recognizing, not lose sight that we are making impressions.
Big believer that stories form and stories have the potential to transform who we are individually.
Absolutely, and cross-generation, right?
Yeah. Well, I also really appreciate your investment into the next generation. I know not too recently, recently you joined the board of SciArc, and there's kind of a historical tie-in with Cal Poly, Pomona, and SciArc, exactly. Right? That kind of goes back. I don't know if they're still like friends or frenemies or whatever.
Well, it's one big industry, but I think it's also, as you saw, like in the industry, right? Things sort of spin off because there's a need, an unmet need or a difference. Yeah. And so I think we all look now, and SciArc just a few years ago celebrated their 50th anniversary. And as a matter of fact, they had honored
not exactly young punk rocker teenagers anymore.
It's funny. We talk about that, and it's still really pushing the boundaries of architecture. A lot of people go on to work in technology companies or in film. And again, back to what I was saying, it's that training that really allows you to broaden, and it's kind of tying it back to, it gives people choice. But yeah, I'm very excited to do that. But as a matter of fact, I'm heading over to Cal Poly Pomona this week for a student. I love students. So alumni roundtable, where again,
Nice.
and I was at USC literally. So I'm kind of hitting them all right now. Just the other day for Women's History Month, they really wanted to hear about, these, oh my God. So some smart kids out there. So our future is in good hands.
That's great.
Well, I love it. I think I've read a few of Marty's books. I think he had a few, post his presidency. And of course, Bob White's still on his world tour. Mm-hmm. When's the Bouza edition coming out? Or what's next? I guess that's what's next in the journey.
Yeah, well, like I said, I just have been enjoying, being out there traveling, speaking, really supporting the industry across the board. So it's great to chat with you all, and but stay tuned.
Yeah, awesome.
Look for those announcements and press releases.
Well, we're so grateful to you. Thank you for your impact and, what you've meant to this industry. And we can't wait to see what's next. Really, honestly. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you both. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, Mel.
And actually, why don't you, we'll pencil you in on the calendar in a couple years to see where things go.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be great.
Yes.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much. And just again, love the conversation.
Well, that cinches it. I'm not ready to be in charge of Walt Disney Imagineering, but that conversation with Barbara left me genuinely inspired in a whole new way. Honestly, she's just a really great person to get to know, and she's an open book. It was awesome. And the way she balances her creative responsibility with empathy, vision, and really a sense of purpose. I really captured that from her. She had purpose while she was there. It's not something you see every day in a leader. So I was thinking, Mel, I know you've been around some incredibly complex projects yourself. What resonated with you in the way that Barbara approaches collaboration and then leading through times of uncertainty?
I think for me, one of Barbara's many gifts is her people skills and her ability to genuinely just be a warm, transparent, open, empathetic human being, and I think one of the things that struck me is the way that we talk, I think, a lot about leading upwards, managing, whether it's clients' expectations or if you're at any role in an organization, whether your title says manager or boss or leader, the reality is you can lead 360 degrees, right? You can lead peers, you can lead subordinates, but that idea of leading upwards, it just struck me the way that she genuinely seemed to honor the unique skill sets and strengths and passions and talents and experience of her bosses. When we talked about the Bobs, she would not say, maybe she has legal documents that require this as well, but no, man, right. She's just so genuinely appreciative of the different types of leaders that she's worked with. And I think that comes from, again, a career as an architect with Gensler, working with so many different types of projects and clients. You just learn, ultimately, there's something you can learn from each context, from each client, from everyone. They have something to bring to the table. There's definitely not like a one size fits all boss or client or whatever. It just seems like that's a real strength of her to really, draw that out and celebrate that and have fun with the differences of the Bobs or whoever.
All the Bobs in the room.
All the Bobs.
That's great. Just really enjoyed that conversation, and we're grateful to Barbara for joining us, and we do hope to have another opportunity to dig in with some more of that fun stuff with Barbara. Well, Mel, we've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. What do you say we turn this leaky tiki back toward home?
Better throttle down.
All right. Until next time, thanks, Mel. The Themed Attraction podcast is hosted by Freddie Martin and Mel McGowan. We want you to know we don't take your listening for granted. We love to make the show, and we love that you love it too. Would you mind helping us out by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? That helps others find the show, and we can keep this community rolling. We want to thank our special guest, Barbara Bouza. Connect with Barbara at Bouza Architect on Instagram or shake her hand on LinkedIn. Get access to new shows, stories, and interviews at themedattraction.com. Start your own profile, discuss the latest advancements, and interact with your fellow theme park designers around the world. Follow the action on Instagram and X at Themed Attraction and join our active discussion group on LinkedIn. Connect with Mel by email via mel@storylandstudios.com or follow him on X at Mel McGowan and Instagram at Visioneer. You can find me at freddymartin.net and follow my adventures at Skipper Freddy on Instagram and X. Our theme music was composed by Rob Watson, other music provided by The Lost Dogs. This episode was designed and produced by the one and only Dr. Barry Hill. Barry is the owner and publisher of Rivershore Press, maker of fine, absolutely beautiful books on parks and design. Learn more from Barry about regional theme park history at americasdisneylands.com and find great books to read at rivershorepress.com. You know, Mel, Barry tells me there's one sight on these jungle rivers that never fails to fill him with awe and wonder, and that is the backside of water. I feel like a bum when I say it, but I just can't quite get behind it. Sure, it's bootyful, but I've seen better sights in my rear view mirror. From the bottom of his heart, Barry wants me to turn tail on my opinion. He's so tushy. His cheeks get red, and with a stern look on his face, his anger rears up, and I end up feeling like a donkey. I should probably back him up, but that waterfall always ends up as the butt of my jokes. No buns intended. Thanks for listening, folks.